Welcome to the table. Won't you go ahead and take a seat? We're just about to begin. I'm Dean Midgarin, joined once more by our cast of wonderful and affordable role players. Today we're going to do something a little bit interesting, a little bit fun. I have two very special guests for us today. Of course, everybody knows Bishop. He's been with us for quite a long time. And we have a brand new guest, a brand new knight to the table. Please go ahead and introduce yourself there. Thalor?
This is Thalor. I've been running Dungeons & Dragons and most role-playing games for going on 25, 30 years, ever since the conception. Been doing other RPG things, gaming, board games, you name it. Been doing that for quite a long time, and I'm very interested in the subject that you're going to be going over today.
Thank you. And for those that didn't actually read the title of our podcast, we're actually talking about taking a break. Why that's actually a good thing in tabletop RPGs. I know that a lot of people use these games as an escape from the real world, but it's honestly like a really good thing that we escape from the escape, I feel. So I guess just like let's really go into it. Like, what are the reasons that someone should take a break from a tabletop game? Why don't we go ahead and start with Bishop?
Sometimes it's good to get a little break. Depends on how often you're gaming. If you're doing it like every week or you have multiple games going on, it's good to kind of take a break, kind of regroup, because the whole point is that it's a game. You don't want to overstress yourself. You don't want to have too much going on. And sometimes you do need a reset.
It's a very good point that you make there. Thalor, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. Actually, I totally agree with Bishop. And since most of my experiences being a GM or a DM, taking a break is a really good mental stress relief because of all the preparation that has to go into it every week. If you're going, full bore for a year, once a week, that's a lot of time that you have to take off to make maps and make other things. So if you get a week or two off here or there, you can decompress, and actually the ideas will come a little easier to you if you're not as stressed about, what am I going to do this week? What am I going to do this week?
Also like to add in, sometimes you have to take breaks because real life situations happen, not just for the DM, but also for your players. I think, DM should be willing to be like, okay, well, if I don't have all my players tonight, it's just good. It's just like, okay, we'll just do it again the following week, or we'll take a little break. Let us know when we can regroup. And then it also a little bit more time to plan out a little bit further out. And then that way you're prepared for the next time you come in.
Right, absolutely. Getting prepared. I mean, taking a break doesn't necessarily mean taking a break where you don't get together with your friends, because a lot of gaming groups are a group of friends who enjoy being around one another for some reason. And you don't necessarily have to take a break from each other. You could just take a break from the tabletop RPG. You could get together, watch a movie that night, or even just play a board game or a card game. You don't necessarily have to RPG it every night, because that takes a lot of time and effort from both the players and the GM, but throwing up a Monopoly board doesn't.
That's actually very true. And actually, this is kind of a special thing that I think this is the only time that we've ever done this on Sunday nights where everybody that's actually sat down at this table has been a GM that has run games. And I don't think that, there are definitely players that, need to take time and, regroup, but GMs, they do a lot of prep work. They do a lot to make these games run. It's just not show up and, throw some monsters on the table. Like, there is a lot of work that goes into this. And especially if you're a GM that, God forbid, runs 2 to 3 games a week. And if you are one of those GMs, my hat to you, that is just a lot of prep work. So, definitely taking a break and, sitting back and resetting and just, being a person is very good for your mental health, but it's also really good for a player. Does anybody have any thoughts on the player side of it, why taking a break should be a good thing as well?
A lot of times players need a break too. Some of it's real life. Some of it is, maybe they forgot or they just didn't have time. And then, I try to be acceptable to that, because things happen. No matter how much you try to plan things out, real life is always going to hit you harder than anything else. So to me, if a guy comes to me and says, hey, like an hour before, it's like, hey man, I'm sorry to do this, but I got to call it because of this. I'm like, okay, no problem, guy. We'll just reschedule. Not a big deal, and move forward.
And you'll also have, with, largish groups, you're going to have difficulties around the summertime, early summertime, fall, because most people like to take little vacations, go to the beach, that sort of thing. And it may, overlap your gaming night. So you may have, 3 or 4 weeks where you're not gaming because, 1 week it's, Joe who's on break, and next week it's Steve, next week it's Mary, next week, and that doesn't necessarily, lead to just players. The DM needs a vacation as well. And if that's the case, you just call it off for that night. My concerns or questions, and I would like to hear, some opinions on this. I'm sorry to hijack this, but how do you handle people who don't show up for a group session? It's only one person. Do you continue on with the rest of the group? Do you cancel the entire group? What do you do?
For me, I have a much smaller group, so it's like usually 3 to 4 or 5. I try to have 4. I like to have 5, but sometimes it's not there. But when you have the 4, it's really hard because it changes the dynamic of the game. You're like, I don't want to throw too much stuff at them because they're short of player. And now it's like, but you still want to try to make it fun if you can carry on without that person. I've had a guy tell me, admit he was enjoying the session all the way halfway through Burnout, and he's like, something else came up. I'm not going to be able to participate, but I still had other people that could. So he's like, well, can I come back? I'm like, well, if you have time to come back, you're more than welcome to come back. Leave it open to them. I like to give those people those opportunities because maybe he might have the opportunity to come back and see where we're at and maybe catch him up. That way, you're just not just totally disregarding that person. But if real life happens and he can't participate, you just have to move on.
This actually hits the channel very hard. It was because normally how we like to do it is we like to have 5 players plus a DM to run these games. And so it's 6 weeks. And that's the main reason that I did that was because if we had someone drop out, we still have 4 people to continue the story on. There's always going to be a little bit disconnect. But when we ran Cyberpunk and we only had 4 people to do it, if one person dropped out, we had to just skip that week. And whereas the regular Sunday nights, they went for 6 weeks, Cyberpunk went on for 3 months because it was so hard getting everybody's schedules. Also, people got sick. And we actually had 2 weeks where people just had internet problems, their internet just didn't work. And so it made... And
I like to add into and this is what I do, and I'm not sure if anybody else does it, but sometimes if I have 3 and I want to go, I'm like, well, I'll throw in an NPC, just a regular, somebody met that's there to help the party just for that session so we can have a session. Mm-hmm. I've done that with the Curse with my other. It does take a little bit away from the game, but if it just has that extra NPC, then you feel like you have 4 characters. And it's a little bit more work on me, but if I could do it, then I'll do it. But I'm not trying to make the NPC kind of run the game. He's just there to help the party.
Right.
Mm. And I mean, there's other ways to justify. How do you justify a person missing for a week or 2, or another person missing for a week, story-wise? Have they gone off the train? Did you just throw them in a bag of holding? That sort of thing.
That really depends if they're a halfling or not, if we throw them in a bag of holding.
So I've done that before, where somebody was missing and then I had to bring them back in. When I was doing, I had, so interestingly enough with Curse of Strahd, what I did for the parties, I made them some sidekicks. So initially, one person decided not to do their sidekick, which I wasn't trying to force them to. I was giving them the option. And then later, as the session, we did a couple sessions, and he messaged me later. He's like, "Hey, I read up more on my sidekick. I really would like to play him." And so I had to kind of figure a way how to introduce the sidekick back into the game. So I had a plan, I had an introduction, and I just fulfilled it and made it work. And it still fell right into the storyline. So I think to that, it's important to try to make somebody feel like they didn't miss a whole lot. And just try to find a way to tie him back into the game.
It really depends. For me, it really depends on where we're at in the story. The way I handle it, I usually handle with arcs, with one character being not the center, but has center focus. So, if the other people are saying, hey, I can't make it, as long as I can make the story work for that session, then I was like, okay, we'll just go ahead and do it. But if it's going to mess up the story too much, I'll just tell them hey, well, let's do something else. Let's, we can hang out. We can play Among Us or something like that. We can hang out as friends and that's fine. But I don't want it to affect the story too much. I want to make sure that everybody can enjoy themselves.
Yeah, for certain, I could agree with that. If it's something that's going to really upset the storyline, then it makes it more difficult. I don't like to cut anyone out, even if they're out for a week or 2. And maybe I will have to say, okay, we'll postpone until we get everybody together, and then just kind of postpone and still have the plan kind of in mind and be like, okay, this is what I'm going to stick with. and this is what we're going to do when he gets back.
Even with Sunday nights, I try my best to make sure the story moves forward. So the stories are a little bit more disconnected. It's not as personal as, like, say, like a full-on Dungeons and Dragons campaign where people are very invested in their characters. Like, their characters are there, but we're not really touching on backstories. We're not doing a huge amount of, like, backstory. We're doing more of, like, okay, here's the plot. Let's move on. Let's keep everything moving. Let's keep the worlds turning. Whereas, like, a full-on campaign, there's a lot of emotional attachment that people get for their characters versus a character that you're only going to play for 6 sessions and probably never going to touch again.
Have you ever had a player insist on someone else at the table playing their character while they're gone?
I have not, but if a player wants me to play their character, I wouldn't object to it. It'd be just something that would be extra for me to do to play their character. I've NPC'd, I've role played a couple of the sidekicks just as an introduction, and then I've done it a couple times where players might ask me a question as the sidekick asking me my opinion, and then of course I come up, okay, well, what am I going to say? All right, this is what I'm going to say. This is how I'm going to feel about it, and then let them make the decision still whether they want to do the thing they want to do or take my opinion. Oftentimes they make their own decision. And then they say, okay, we agree with what he says, so we'll do what this guy says, which could be me, and as the sidekick making a suggestion to the party.
What about you, Thalor? Anybody ask, like, hey, can this person play my character?
Yeah, I've had that happen plenty of times over the past 30 years. It's ranged from, can you play the character? Can Jason play the character? Can have Corey play my character while I'm gone? I guess they trust each other, obviously, and it's not like they're going to be cheating or anything. It's still, it's still role playing, and they just have to do it twice. Some players can handle it, some can't, and you'll figure out which ones can and can't, over a course of a session or two, just to figure out, how flustered they get or how can they change personalities for each character. But yeah, I've had plenty of people do that. Most of the time it works out. The rest of the time, after a certain amount of time and the person asking, hey, can so-and-so play my character? And that person doesn't really handle it well, we would just cancel for that week, or play something different, play some card games or whatever, or just hang out and eat wings. So, I mean, canceling a tabletop RPG because someone's missing is just going to be a fact of life. Not everybody, focuses 100% on role playing. And I know a couple people who that's their lives. That's all they do. And they get very upset when you don't show up or cancel on them. But it is something you got to live with. It is different personalities and the things that you have to do when someone cancels, and to make that executive decision whether or not to cancel the whole session or just continue on.
Yeah, I definitely know what you're saying there. I've been in groups where, like, if we've, like, hey, let's all get together for gaming, and, like, back of their mind, they're like, okay, we're going to play Dungeons and Dragons, and then we end up playing a board game, and they're just sitting there just pouting the entire night.
You were there. That was us.
I know.
I know who you're referencing. That's.
I remember that here.
I'm not going to mention names, but yeah, that was quite an interesting night. It's like, I thought you said we were going to game. We are gaming.
Yeah.
This isn't gaming. What are you talking about?
So
yeah,
now
I absolutely agree. It does take a special person to be able to play more than one character.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I didn't want to try to force the sidekicks, but I did build. So I did something really kind of extraordinary. I built each sidekick around each character. Since I knew what they were building, I built a storyline where how they met before and then they re-met again back in this town, and then now they're going to be asked to be part of a guild, and then now they're going to be friends, and now they're going to travel together. So it was just a unique opportunity to use a little bit of a storyline to really draw the interest for another person to play like a sidekick type of character.
Right. We've recently, well, not recently, because of COVID, I haven't seen my tabletop group in a year now. But we're trying to get back together, and somebody just had a baby, and it's very hard to get back together and get back into it. But one time, not too long ago, we had one or two people say they couldn't make it. I think it was two people couldn't make it, and they were not integral to the storyline, but they were integral to the party because they provided that service. They had a warrior, they had a mage, they had, so if your tank is missing, you're going to get pummeled on, especially if it's a hardcore dungeon. So it doesn't make sense to continue on. But thankfully, during that time, they were in town, and the two people canceled out. So we spent an entire session still role playing, but all they did was go shopping, and they had a really fun time with it.
And that's actually really cool. Like, you don't have to roll the dice to sit down and actually play the game.
Right. It's not role playing ROLL.
And I'm doing the same exact thing for I was running Friday Night Campaign, and I was basically playing two characters. I'm playing my fighter, my dwarf, and then there was an NPC healer. Something happened in the game where he disappeared. I'm like, well, I have a cleric sitting off on the side not doing anything. I'll just bring him in as an NPC. And they're like, oh, okay. And cleric for cleric. So I was already, playing a cleric that wasn't mine, but this was already built. It was a life cleric. So it's fun because I play my dwarf, and then I play my cleric, which is a half elf. So it's two different things, but you get role play both kind of differently.
Now, I know this is off topic, but this story just popped in my head. We do have a cleric, and she has a little child. And like halfway through combat, the kid starts crying and wailing, and all she says, like just over the mic, just make sure I don't die, and then just runs off. So I de facto, played her character because I had access to her character sheet on Roll20, and so I was like, all right, she's just going to heal this round. That's all she's doing. We're good.
And often not, players are good. Some players are good at things, and some players aren't. Like I have a player. All she does is run barbarians, but she's really good at it. She doesn't handle spell casting very well because she's not familiar with it. It's not her cup of tea. So, if that's what she wants to do, then, go for it. I did introduce a sidekick for her that wasn't a barbarian. It was a fighter, because I'm trying to introduce her into something a little bit different than a barbarian. Maybe it piques her interest because they have different abilities, different things that go on in battle. So she's playing both her characters pretty well. So it seems like it was a good decision to make.
Now, we've talked a lot about short-term breaks, like taking like a week or two off. But I also want to talk about the long-term breaks where you, like Thalor, you haven't like seen your group in a year, Yeah,
it's kind of tough to do that and get back into it. Thankfully, I take good notes. I know where we are in the story. And unfortunately, we were nearing the climax of the story when this both hit. But taking a long time off, you get rusty, you forget things. You get kind of, even lazy about it. You say, oh, well, do I really want to go back and do this and put all this effort and time into it? And you find out, it depends on your personality. For me, Dungeons and Dragons, planning out and being the DM was my creative outlet. So I'm kind of missing that. But I am, I occupy myself with other things until we can get back together with the group, which, like I said, should be soon. If everybody gets immunization, we'll definitely get together and start it back up again, hopefully with all the same people coming back, because that's also a problem. If you take too long of a break, other people in your group may have moved on to other things.
Right. And I think that was like one of the things I want to talk about is that there are benefits to a break, but there's also a lot of drawbacks. Life does happen. Life does move on. So, like, what are some of the drawbacks that you guys have found, DMing as long as you guys have been?
It was a little bit different because I was in the military. So sometimes it wasn't easy to find groups because you're always underway. It's hard to find people who know how to play. Then you have to find a place to play. So we did have a good group for, we were all on the same ship and we started playing together. But after a while, when we start moving around and you leave groups, it's difficult. Like I didn't really get back into this again until probably about a couple of years ago. And I was just really interested in getting back into it. It's a different feel because it was a different type of gaming system. Not really so much, but there were some changes in 5 as opposed to 3.5 or 3.0 or even before that. So now you have to kind of go read up on things, study a little bit. So you have to figure out, okay, what's the new mechanics? What's different about D&D now as opposed to when you were doing it when you were D&D version number 1.
Yeah, that's so true. Difficulties and cons for taking a break. I listed a couple. People may have moved on. Life happens. Even the DM. You may lose interest or come across another hobby you want to do for a while, and that puts a crimp in it. You end up having to almost disband for a while, and then get another group together later when you want to play again. But so there's always the risk of losing the people that you're associating with while playing because of life. If you're taking huge swaths of time off, then you run that risk. Although there are games and players that I know and DMs that I know that only gamed once every 3 months, and they were perfectly fine. So it all depends on how your game is set up. If you're set up for once a week, twice a week, twice a month, 3 times a month, whatever, and that deviates, then you run the risk of people leaving the group.
I think some of it is a feel too. Like if you missed it a bunch of times and you haven't DM'd in a while, it's like, okay, like when I first initially started, I was doing like once every 2 weeks because there was another game in between that we were all involved in. So it was like doing 1 week my game, the next week we were all playing in the other game. So it was kind of working out that way, and I was giving the other DM the chance to still run his games. So there's a little bit of that too. It's just working with people.
The inspiration for the subject for the Sunday nights is that we had finished up Cyberpunk and we had gotten everything ready for Mutants and Masterminds. Like everything was set, we were ready to go, and just life just hit me like a truck. My wife, she has college that she has to take every 10 years to get recertified as a teacher, and the college courses are just a beast. And on top of that, I'm taking my own courses for stuff, and I just don't have the time. And it was really nice. Most of the players were very understanding. They're like, oh, all right, well, that's not a problem. We understand life happens. And it made me feel really good about myself to know it's like, okay, well, we're not doing the story, but maybe we can do stuff in the interim. And I've just gotten a lot of support from the players and also the people that have been with the show since the beginning. So I do appreciate all of that. It was just nice to, it's like, oh, you guys actually care.
Yeah, and there's also things you could do if you know you're going to have like a break or extending break. If you're in the middle of a game, not starting a new game, but maybe you have some downtime activities for the characters to do. Like, character wants to research new spells, he wants to learn some new skills, he wants to go, do some things to learn some things. You're like, okay, well, okay, if you want some downtime activities, okay, no problem. You can research your spells. You'll find a place to go. It's going to take you a couple weeks because you're going to have to figure out how the spell works, what components you need, practice casting that spell, and it gives them a little bit more incentive to kind of like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of cool.
That's actually a really good thought right there. I wanted to put it out there is that one of the things that I do when I know that we're not gaming that week, when I have a cancellation or I have to go to work that evening, on Discord, on social media, I open up, it's like, hey, gaming's canceled, but I'll go ahead and open up the text RP chat. You guys can, and I'll let them play for a week. So they can type out what their characters does, and it turns into a text RP. So they're not playing, but they are role playing. So the people that enjoy that kind of stuff at least get something for that, for their session, for their time. So I think social media has definitely helped a lot with taking breaks and not skipping weeks. I just wanted to put that out there. It's helped out a lot.
And sometimes you just have to take a break, even if it's short term, long term, just because you just get burned out. Mm-hmm. You don't want to get burned out, because if you get burned out on anything, whether it be role playing or baseball or football or whatever, you're very unlikely to come back to it. Yeah. Because all you're thinking of is the stress and the problems that you had to go through, and do I really want to do this again? So if you take regular breaks and if you think of it as a pro, you lower that level of stress that you're going through so that you will not get burned out as quick.
Well, for me, mostly it's my work schedule. Like once a month, I'm doing a day shift, night shift. So if I'm working night shifts, unfortunately, usually it doesn't affect my weekends too much because I only have to work weekends like maybe once a month. And I think I know for Mid, there's a couple times I had to bail out on them because of my work schedule. It wasn't something I could control, but it was just something I had to do. And I was playing Friday night campaigns every week, and then we've been doing it for the last few weeks. But now, I'm going to have to take a break because real life happens, work schedule happens, and I'm not going to be able to participate. And the DM's like, okay, we'll just take a little break, and we'll just have a little extended break until you can get back on days. I'm like, all right, well, that's cool. I appreciate that.
It's definitely. I mean, I recently retired, so it's a lot less of that for me now. I'm free all the time, and that also causes a lot of stress, which makes me want to go back to getting back into RPG and tabletop stuff, because I'm quite honestly bored most of the time now. But I've taken a long enough a break. I think I'm ready to get back into it. I just got to get the gang back together, and that again may prove to be hard, impossible, or easy. I mean, it all depends on the people. I think for my group, we have, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and myself. So we have 6 players, or 5 players and a DM, and that's not too hard. Get back together, and even if we lose one player, we can still continue on or start a new campaign. 4 is the minimum for me to play, especially Dungeons and Dragons, because I think you need somebody to tank, you need somebody to heal, you need somebody, unless you want to throw NPCs in there again, but that becomes more work for you.
And I want to talk about, I do also want to talk about the players, and I get this comment all the time on when people message me. And it's like, hey, I want this part of the storyline. I want this to happen, and I want you to write it in your normal style. I'm like, what's my normal style? It's like, torture. So I definitely do put my players through the ringer sometimes, and I feel like it's also a good break because people get very invested in these characters, and when something goes wrong or when something happens, when the dice doesn't agree with you, the game can become stress. And I feel like it's a nice break is that reset button where they can take some time off and say, oh yeah, this is just a game, this is just for fun, this is not overly important. I understand that my character died, I understand that this bad thing happened, but it didn't really happen, it just happened in a game. So
right.
And I know that we're all speaking as DMs, but I think we all should need to also, the player aspect on that side, the player should also want to take breaks every now and then. The DMs definitely, the amount of work that we put into run games is just it's overwhelming, and especially if you work full time, or if you're in college, if you're in college full time, kudos to you guys. You guys are amazing people, and you shouldn't take anything less than that. But players also need to understand, look, things are going to happen, and it's okay to take a step back and be like, all right, well, I'll just need a few minutes, or need a few days to chill, or I need a week, or I need 2 weeks. But going into the next part of this is that those long-term campaigns, those long-term breaks where you're off for 2 months, what is the best way to get back in the swing of things? How should people approach, okay, we haven't played in a couple months, we want to jump right back into it. How do you guys deal with that?
For me, I started off with homebrew, and then once that homebrew ended, I was like, okay, what do you guys want to do next? Is there anything you guys want? Is there anything you guys? So it's feedback too from your group, to say, okay, well, give me some time to read up on that campaign, and we'll figure something out in about a week or 2 or 3 weeks, or it could be 4 weeks. Or if real life happens, you're like, okay, guys, I'm sorry for the delay, but we'll get back into it as soon as we can, and I'll let you know when's the best time we can do it. I think that it goes both ways. And I think the DM also needs to be open about that. Maybe okay, guys, we'll do the best we can, but if we can't do it, then we'll just do it whenever we get everybody together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way I would handle it, after a long absence, is the first session would be, especially if I haven't seen these people in a while. I think it's not so much a reacquaintance because you're friends, but I mean okay, I'll just use the word reacquaintance. You want to get together and start to enjoy each other again. So maybe the first session, we don't play for more than an hour. The rest of the time is catching up, or just, chilling and eating pizzas, things like that. You don't want to go hardcore, right into it immediately. You want to ease people back into it, because, players get stressed out just as easily as DMs, depending on their characters. Because, somebody made a mention that people get attached to their characters, and that's very much true. So if you ease back into it, I think it's a lot easier to control burnout, to control what's happening with the group, to control, how things go, so that you're not immediately saying, oh, we need to take another break.
So you're saying a second session 0, just
yeah, sorta. I mean, it's your session 0 is just creating characters and things like that. But I mean, you've already got characters.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's just a complete narrative. Maybe the session 0, 2.0 when you come back is
Actually,
the
I wrote that in
DM
my
just
notes.
recapping everything that happened.
I wrote session 0 2.0 in my notes when I was wanting to talk about this. So yes,
Oh,
get
fun.
out of my head.
Well, yeah, maybe it's just a GM or the DM recapping everything that's happened that he has in his notes. Your party did this and we found this and you turned this into this person and the bard lost his foot and things like that.
So my Tuesday game, I have stopped writing like notes about what happens because I have a very wonderful note taker. And I keep borrowing her notes for it's like, oh, what was that thing? And I'll just, instead of like looking at my notes, she has notes on the Roll20 system. I just click on that and I was like, and like everything's labeled, everything's nice, like it's all orderly and organized. I just like, this is what happened, or this was the random bartender that you met in 3 days ago. So I cheat so much with using her notes, and I'm not endorsing like Roll20 or anything. It's just I use that system so much in my games. It's become almost second nature to me. So kudos to that player. Thank you very much for writing such detailed notes. You are truly a godsend.
If you have somebody who can do that for you, that's very, very nice. And I mean, it takes just one more thing off of the plate of the DM that he has to stress out about.
So, hitting the reset button, going back to a session 0, just doing a narrative, just, making sure that everybody's on the same page and maybe getting like an hour in of playtime. I mean, that sounds really good. That sounds like something that I feel like a lot of people that don't play too often should do. Like if you're taking off 2 months, if you're taking off 3 months, that might be the best way to go about it. I haven't figured out any other way to do it, and I think that a lot of people just forget that, yeah, this is a gaming group, but you guys are friends. Hang out, enjoy each other's company, play a board game once in a while.
The name of the game is, to enjoy yourself. Whether you are gaming or whether you're not. I mean, there were times when we came to a session intending to game. And while waiting for somebody to show up, we started playing a card game called Flux. And we ended up playing Flux the rest of the night.
Yeah.
Then after that person showed up, and we had a lot of fun laughing, and as long as you're having fun, it doesn't matter what you're doing.
We sat around at Orc's table. We all came to play Dungeons and Dragons, and while we were waiting on the pizza, we started playing. I think it was some board game. I can't remember. I think it was like it had something to do with Scotland Yard. I think it might have been called Scotland Yard.
Yeah.
And so we were just like waiting on the pizza and just playing the game. Pizza showed up. We ate. We chatted. We hung out. And we did not play Dungeons and Dragons the entire night. We were just goofing off. We were just goofing off and being friends. And
exactly.
And I felt like, and that was a good thing. Like as someone that runs the games, I was very stressed out. I was very close to burning out. I am one of those people that will burn the candle at both ends, trying to get everything done. And the amount of like relief that I felt leaving his house that night. I was like, wow, like I don't have to do that. It's not something that I would do every time, but I really needed that. I really needed that small little break, that small little breather. There's a lot of weight that dungeon masters, game masters have on themselves to make sure that everybody's having a good time.
Mm-hmm.
So, final thoughts for the session. I mean, I had a lot of fun, some really good insights, and hopefully that the people that are listening to this, you guys take something from it. Even if it's just, it's okay not to play once a week, or it's okay not to play every so often. Just take a breather and calm down. So who has some final thoughts for us?
Oh, I got some. Just like you said, take a breather. Anybody who's listening right now, take a breather, go outside, or get out of the basement or wherever you play. Go outside, go walk through the woods, go do something, listen to nature for a while, decompress, because if you come into a game session all jacked up and ready to go and excitable, then it kind of takes away from the game. But if everybody comes back all chill and relaxed and having had a good time, I think the session and further sessions feel that much better. So just take breaks every so often. They're good for you. If you can set up regular breaks with your entire group, I think that's best. But if you can't, everybody has to deal with it on their time because, everybody's human. Everybody has their own schedule.
Also, one thing I like to do, and I've done it with this campaign that I'm working on, Curse Strahd, is sometimes it's good to have a break in the game, which I mean by that is you're just doing role playing instead of combat. Or you can mix it up and go, okay, we'll do a little bit of role playing, we'll have a little bit of combat, but some sessions you may just have a relaxing, just role play, have fun with the characters, let them, explore, let them do the investigations, let them relax a little bit. Where they're, maybe they don't have an encounter that session. And I tell them, like, sorry, there was no encounters, but some of it was because it's part of the storyline. And I'm trying to mix the storyline in so they can get a full scale of what's going on. So they can say, oh, and that's satisfying too to me as a DM, as they say, oh, and as the storyline, you're trying to lay out the storyline and just have a role play session, so that way you start revealing more of the storyline of your session.
I think that's amazing. I think that's really cool. Thank you guys so much for listening. Big shout out to our 2 guests tonight. You guys have been amazing, and I couldn't ask for anybody else. You guys are very, you guys had a lot of good ideas, and I do love the dialogue that we had today. So
it was my pleasure being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. It was definitely good fun. Appreciate it. Thalor, nice meeting you. Hopefully we'll see each other sometime in the near future. And if you ever need someone for a game, you could always ask Mid because he'll tell you I'm always flexible in playing.
Excellent.
Thank you all for listening. You guys have a great night, and we'll catch you next week here on Sunday nights. Minstrels, play us out.